So listen, basically the aim of this short presentation is very much to answer three questions that we think are extremely relevant for marketers, agencies and publishers in the current economic climate. And they are, as per the screen, firstly, why should I, as a brand, keep advertising during a downturn? Secondly, is hard news an effective advertising environment? Thirdly, really, why is hard news an effective environment for advertisers? So let's look at the first question. Why should I keep advertising during a downturn? So with COVID-19 in retreat in much of the world, economies are slowly starting to move out of lockdown in many places. And whilst this is obviously good news, one of the immediate issues we face is that marketeers are now having to navigate a very challenging economic environment, an environment that is predicted by many to be a protracted global downturn. When the COVID-19 pandemic gained global momentum in early 2020, we, the BBC, along with many other publishers around the world, immediately felt the repercussions. Brands postponed or even cancelled planned and in some cases booked campaigns. And many advertisers turned to technology to implement sweeping, fairly draconian blocking strategies to seek to ensure that their campaigns stayed well clear of any bad news environments and COVID-related content. So whilst we think this knee-jerk reaction is understandable, it is also commercially self-damaging. Multiple research, evidence over decades, highlights the fact that brands who are able to stay the course and continue to market during an economic downturn are those that recover quicker and enjoy far greater business success in the long run. And indeed, from the latest Content 360 poll, the majority of marketing budget in Southeast Asia has been cut in the region of 25 to 50% due to the COVID pandemic. So what history has shown us, though, is that cuts in marketing budgets do not really reflect the trends around consumer spending. Looking back to the last 2008-2009 downturn, global advertising spend decreased marginally by about 5.1%, but consumer spending showed a modest stubbornness to remain positive at 2.8%. And this trend actually continued post-recession, as you can see, up to about 9% in 2010-2011. The clear risk then is for those brands who do not invest in advertising during downturns, as their customers continue to spend and may be swayed to adopt other brands who continue to advertise, thus gaining share of mind and share of wallet. And this risk is actually amplified in the post-recession period, where those brands who have continued to market themselves have won customers, grown market share, and more than likely built brand preference amongst customers. A good example of this is actually very close to home, the 2003 SARS pandemic. We found then actually that affluent Asian consumers did not stop spending on high-end luxury goods during SARS. In fact, spending on luxury watches grew by 17% immediately after SARS ended compared to the SARS period. And this story was actually echoed in leather goods, quality leather goods, and designer labels in general, which grew by as much as 45%. So I've talked a little bit about absolute spending during a downturn, but let's examine the importance of maintaining share of voice. The following few charts examine three equal-sized groups of brands from the period of the 2008 to 2009 recession. Each group of brands is differentiated by their media investment strategies, measured by excess share of voice, ESOV. Excess share of voice is the difference between a brand's share of voice and a brand's share of market, the key measure of investment. So looking at this chart and from left to right, group one on the left, whose excess share of voice was 0 or less, in other words, they weren't spending much, they hadn't gone dark, they experienced negligible profit growth post-recession. You can see that after the recession ended, they saw 0 profit growth. If we look at group two in the middle, whose excess share of voice was in the range of 0 to 8%, they actually benefited from modest profit growth levels post-recession, so up to 10%. But by comparison, group three, with over 8% excess share of voice, These brands saw the recession actually as an opportunity, and they achieved significant post-recession profit levels, well in excess of their excess share of voice. Now remember, of course, that some of these brands will have merely held their spend level to achieve this level of excess share of voice during the downturn. How have they done that? Well, obviously, sadly, during a downturn, media tends to be cheaper as publishers seek out advertisers and share, and competitors obviously aren't advertising either. That said, the brands that invested in excess share of voice saw significant business effects such as profit, pricing, share, and penetration to markets post the downturn. One of the casualties of a downturn seems to be brand building campaigns. And whilst it seems sensible for brands and agencies to focus on media channels that deliver scalable reach and conversion during really tough times, this fixation ignores the economic reality of brand value and the role that quality media can play in building brand attributes and metrics. Research from 2018 from Ubiquity highlighted this disproportionate, albeit much ignored, contribution that brand delivers overall sales. As per the chart, 30% of a business's sales are directly attributable to brand KPIs, things like image, personality, and PR word of mouth. 30% is five times greater level of attribution than that delivered by media alone, which contributes to mere 6% towards sales. The takeaway for advertisers is this: always, and especially in the downturn, ensure your creative reaches your target audience in an environment that allows you to leverage shared positive brand attributes in order to maximize your potential sales. It's also been proven how advertisers benefit from the positive brand attributes of the media environment in which they feature, and the strongest attributes of that media are more easily transferred to the advertisers themselves. So on the previous slide, I showed the importance of building brand and the contribution it makes to sale. Here, we see how effective news environments, and specifically quality news environments, can be in supporting and growing brand metrics for advertisers. The strongest attributes of the media are those most likely to be transferred to the brands themselves. And if you're a brand and you're growing your attributes in the mind of a consumer, what you're actually doing is reducing those brand attributes of your competitors in the minds of the consumer as well. Lastly, of all the brand attributes to focus on in today's climate of fake news and misinformation, brand trust is a critical strength. If people trust you, they will pay more attention to your marketing and communications efforts, which is crucial in helping to bridge the gap during a period of reduced advertised activity down to downturn. And if your customers trust you, they are more than twice as likely to buy your brand first, stay loyal, and recommend your brand to others. That's obviously a recommendation. So by choosing to work with the media that your audience trusts, you will be able to better exploit this media strength, i.e. trust, to your own economic benefits. And actually, Keith Weed was interviewed last week, and he said, quite interestingly, a brand without trust is actually just a product. So now let's turn our attention to the second question. Is hard news an effective advertising environment? Some recent IAB NeuroInsight research conducted in Australia reveals the effectiveness of quality news environments in driving and anchoring brand recall. When consuming content, even challenging content in trusted news environments, audiences are found to be more engaged with that content. And this engagement benefits the advertisers present. Why is that? Because the readers or viewers are actually emotionally impacted in the news content they are consuming, and stronger emotions lead to strong memory encoding in the advertising present there. As the top graph shows, you can see by the peaks and troughs how the memory encoding is higher when the emotional intensity is greater. Additionally, not only are these advertising memories stronger, they last longer in the memory of the consumer. So the consumer remembers the message for much longer. The BBC actually undertook a similar research exercise in 2019, researching engagement by content across a range of advertising partners on BBC World News and BBC.com. And interestingly, we found the same results. The campaigns that ran mostly in news content outperformed those that ran mostly in non-news content across a range of brand attributes. And the ones that we mentioned were familiarity, consideration, recommendation, and lastly, positive brand associations. So now we need to ask, how does quality news impact campaign effectiveness? And to answer that question, the BBC undertook a series of studies during the COVID-19 pandemic, and my colleague Sally Wu will now take you through the results. Sally?
Thanks, John. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yeah.
Great. So in the rest of today's session, I will be sharing with you our latest research and case studies. This includes APAC consumer sentiments and outlook, as well as campaign effectiveness, and results from our proprietary neuroscience tool to help us make sense of the relationship between consumer and news media in the time of crisis. Before I start with our research results, I want to bring your attention to this worldwide consumer consumption trend provided by our friends at Comscore. Between March 2019 and 2020, which is the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, Comscore has recorded a 44% growth in unique visitors worldwide. This is to the news category in general. During a crisis, credible news media is the place people turn to obtain the latest updates, not just on digital media, of course. For example, we also saw a 30% increase of our viewership on BBC World News channel in India and 87% increase in the channel for South Africa. And how is this relevant to APAC? Digital consumers in APAC are more engaged with news media than any other regions in the world. According to Comscore, APAC consumers represent 47% of all global time spent on digital news sites. Compared to the SARS outbreak from 2003, the majority of the world's population is now living in an entirely digitalized world. 8 out of 10 of us in Singapore are now constantly connected on social networks, for example. When we ask our audience about their news consumption pattern change before and after the pandemic, 54% said that they are now consuming more international news. The percentages are higher among millennials, South Asians, and also among Australians. Frequent travelers are constantly tuned into news updates to find out the impact on travel plans. The 2020 COVID-19 pandemic is a true test for mankind. I think you will agree with me, because no one is immune. The crisis has changed the way we look at the world and provided a chance for us to re-examine our surroundings. Gen Z customers in particular are interested in finding out how to live more sustainably after the lockdown and giving back to their community. In terms of our latest sentiment about global economic outlook, 43% of us in APAC say that they are very optimistic. This is 19% higher than the overall sentiment we had back in March. The APAC Optimism Index at this moment is 10% higher than the UK. The majority of us agree that brands are expected to show compassion to strike the right tone during this time, especially. Lastly, 40% of Southeast Asians are looking forward to traveling as soon as they can, while taking all the necessary precautions. As an insight specialist, one question that I get asked over and over is the concern that the latest news coverage negatively impact clients' campaign results. In order to assess this, I looked into BBC Score Study, which is a tool that we use to track cross-platform campaign effectiveness. We use the same set of quantitative and qualitative advertising effectiveness metrics for 11 campaigns that were active on BBC platforms during March and April of this year, and compare the results to our historical survey benchmarks. The campaigns in this test came from various sectors on the slide, including banking, telco, tourism, B2B, luxury goods, airlines, technology. What we found out is that the campaign performance was, on average, 6 to 7% higher than the benchmarks that we have gotten before the pandemics. In fact, 86% said that they feel positively towards the brand they saw on the campaign, while 85% of them say that they want to find out more about the brand. Brand recommendation also scored higher than norms. 2 in 3 people said that they would recommend the brand they saw in the campaign, while 22% more respondents say that they are very likely to recommend a brand compared to the results we saw before the pandemic. Marketeers know that brands benefit from the halo effect being associated with quality and trusted publishers and news channels. Trusted news platforms attract and retain quality consumers, leading to a higher level of content consumption and engagement. As a researcher, I'm curious to find out if the same also applies to the times that we are in. During the crisis, from the ad score results we just saw, the answer seems to be yes. But what made these campaigns effective and deliver higher affinity scores than normal times? In order to answer these questions, we tap onto our neuroscience toolkit to find out why. So how does it work? How does it work? How do we test the impact and effectiveness of advertising around hard news? We incorporated 3 types of neuroscience techniques: facial coding, eye tracking, and implicit association testing. We call it the science of engagement, or proprietary neuroscience methodology. Using a control versus exposed approach, we recruited about close to 2,000 samples across 3 markets, Singapore, Australia, and India. We then exposed the 9 test groups to 1 piece of video content each. While watching the content, respondents' facial expression are recorded via the webcam from their laptop or mobile phones. When the IAB team send out a research deck, we can include a link to more details about the science of engagement. So we used BBC homepage as our test environment. What you're seeing on this slide are the actual stimuli we used for our study, where a banner ad and a pre-roll video, Jeanette, you can click. They set in situ on the website with COVID-related news coverage. A major commercial challenge, as you know, to us, the news organizations, is to convince brands that the relevance and importance of advertising around bad news actually doesn't impact the consumer's perception towards the brands. In this case, we're talking about COVID, but similar results can apply to other negative news stories. Quality news content about any major news events create a deepened engagement, heightened emotional response in users, which makes us more susceptible to advertising content. Because by working directly with publishers, brands can access to news environments without compromising brand safety. In the following case studies, in which we test campaigns from our client DBS, Telstra, and Madhya Pradesh Tourism, we aim to examine content and brand engagement, sentiment, response to brand attributes, and other advertising metrics. These results were freshly collected during the peak of the COVID lockdown period. One thing I did notice from evaluating our facial coding results was that there is a general sense of seriousness from respondents across our 3 test markets. I suspect that most people are feeling sad and down during this time. However, we must remember one key finding from our Science of Engagement thought leadership study. That is, to brand marketeers, there is no such thing as a bad emotion. Emotional intensity is a good thing, regardless of the emotional level. If the content triggers little emotion, it means respondents feel indifferent, which is a bad thing. In fact, many academic research have indicated that serious emotions is a strong driver for brand memory. Any heightened emotional intensity is a good sign of engagement. And engagement, according to the latest Content 360 poll results, is the #1 challenge marketeers face in content marketing across APAC. The next slide. In this case study, we placed a pre-roll video before the COVID-related news came up. The DBS Sparks minisode successfully triggered a notable amount of emotional intensity. Keep in mind that the pre-roll isn't played in isolation, but within the quality news environment, where all the positive brand attributes are present. Thanks to the surprise appearance of Olympic champion Joseph Schooling, who enticed the emotions which appeared just before the introduction of the DBS brand logo, creating a perfect branding moment. From our another thought leadership study that we published, The Science of Memory, we've learned that there is a golden window of an optimal branding moment, which happens seconds after an elevated emotional uplift. From a series of brand wave studies that we have conducted, this is the time that visual and audio cues get deeply encoded into our long-term memory. And this memorable point belongs to the advertiser itself. The positive impact to the DBS campaign can also be seen from the response to their brand image statements. Comparing the results from the exposed to the control sample, there are double-digit differences across the board. If you're familiar with the DBS #Sparks miniseries, it's about inspiration and the power of purpose. It's really good to see the attribute social impact received the highest uplift from our study. According to the latest Content 360 poll, brand purpose is a key characteristic consumers are looking for in brands in this new normal. You may be cynical and say that people can lie when answering surveys, but we all know that our subconscious mind doesn't lie. What you're looking at here on this slide are the results from the implicit association shift from the study. In this test, we measure response to brand attributes as well as speed to response among the control and the exposed groups. What you're seeing on the slide are the percentages of response that showed a strong association to each statement. Among the control group who did not see the DBS pre-roll, which is featured in situ on the BBC News homepage, the word international, you can see on the results on the slide, did not specifically stand out from the other attributes. However, the placement of the DBS pre-roll on a truly global news publisher had successfully enhanced this characteristic in the test group. It's also worth mentioning that after exposing to the stimulus, the trade relating DBS Bank to a sustainable outcome tripled. Because of the time constraint, I wasn't able to share with you full results from the Madhya Pradesh Tourism Board campaign from the India market. But here are some top-line advertising effectiveness results. For brands like DBS and Maya Pradesh, there is a near 100% total awareness in their home markets, Singapore and India, respectively. What's difficult is to gain that brands gain the top of mind awareness of the brand. As you can see across the board, there's 23 to 28% of increase between the control and the test group for top of mind awareness. And also purchase intent also increased double digit. So here is the summary of my findings. Our study results from the peak of the COVID lockdown did not show a negative impact towards brands from the consumers. Comparing campaign effectiveness results before and during the pandemic, we actually saw campaigns perform better among qualitative measurements and also among recommendation index. Engagement level and attention scores paid to the brand messages sitting in situ of BBC News homepage remained high. Quality news environment will enhance brand attributes regardless of the context. So now I will hand it back to John to close the session for us.
John, this is Laura here. Can you hear me? We seem to have lost your audio again, unfortunately.
Oh, I can hear you.
Now you are back. Sorry, you're going to have to start again.
That wasn't hard. So thank you, Sally. And in summation then, just to reiterate our point, firstly, it is that quality news publishers provide a compelling environment to deliver your brand message. And it turns the audience's engagement with the news provider into an emotional engagement, which leads to greater engagement with the advertising. The trust that consumers have in the credible news organizations themselves create effectively a halo effect on the brands associated. And just to sum up before we get to the Q&A on the next slide, 3 key points to remember are, firstly, maintaining or building share of voice during a downturn is critical to business succession post-recovery. Secondly, trusted quality news publishers offer brands a more effective marketing channel to build business during an economic downturn, and there's statistics to prove that. And thirdly, hard news actually is excellent at driving engagement and therefore trust in brands themselves. Don't forget Keith Reed's words. So listen, that concludes our presentation for the day. So whilst we're getting ready for some Q&A, I know you sent some questions in. Sally and I are around to answer those for you. Laura?
Ooh, great. Thank you. Sally, I will throw some of these possibly your way to start. So I think one of the first questions that we've gotten in is this research capacity within the BBC or is it a research agency that's being used?
It's actually so the science of engagement, which is the tool we use to measure the engagement level on content. We mostly use it to measure the branded content effectiveness from our BBC StoryWorks team, with the content produced by our in-house production agency, BBC StoryWorks. But in this case, we turn it onto actual editorial content for COVID. We do have a proprietary technology partner who we work with, Element Human. But in terms of the sample and the research capacity, we use various third-party sample providers and agencies.
Wonderful, thank you. So this question asks, was the analysis also done on competitive news platforms? I think the reason might be to remove any BBC specific biases.
Yeah. Oh, well, that would be our dream, isn't it? To really see the differences between our content and the competitors' content. However, it is difficult because we don't own the competitors' content nor any assets. And even the brand assets, we don't own any of those third-party assets. So I guess if a credible industry organization like IAB is interested to co-found a study like this, I think you can get everybody to authorize their content, and then we can have a truly interesting, comprehensive test going on. But unfortunately, at this moment, we can only test our own content.
I don't like how that turned back on me, but I understand what you're saying. Thank you for being so open about some of the reasons behind that. I think this one might be more for Sally, where Anonymous has said, we're very shy today on our Q&A. You mentioned that there's no emotion that is bad. Can you expand on that? This person continues, given that there's a lot of news right now that's quite negative, are you saying that even if someone is upset, it's still the right time to reach them?
So as brand marketeers, this is finding from our Science of Engagement thought leadership study. As brand marketeers, what we want to see is that people are displaying intense emotion after or during the consumption of the content. And there are 6 basic human emotions like surprise, disgust, anger, happy, curiosity. I cannot remember all the academic labels, but each one of them cannot be seen superficially, because each of the emotion signify a lot of different sub feelings. So what we have found out from our Science of Engagement tool, which with the tool we have tested, I think by now close to 30 to 40 client brands, because we also offer it as a bespoke research to our clients. What we have found out is that a lot of times when people are engaged with the content, they look deep in thought. And for example, 2 years ago, there was a piece of Science of Engagement test that we did for HSBC. It's about long-term relationship and how people actually fail to maintain that. It's a branded content. And we did see a heightened level of sadness reviewed from the facial coding. And however, when at the same time, for all the brand metrics or campaign effectiveness metrics associated with that particular HSBC campaign, it performed fantastically. So and there's more examples like that. So the key to remember is that you as brand marketeers, we shouldn't be fixated on enticing only the quote unquote positive emotion, because any emotion can do the magic as long as it is contextually relevant, and also sitting in the right environment. That's the key to think about.
Wonderful. So John, I'm going to ask you this, and I don't want you to answer it, please. The Science of Engagement exercise seems extremely exhaustive and lengthy. The question is, what's the minimum advertising campaign spend? But I'm not going to let you answer that. Can we follow up with anyone who wants to know that? Can they follow up with you directly?
They can do. Absolutely fine to follow up with me, no worries.
Okay, wonderful. And then there's one which is quite interesting, where it's asking that heat maps are an indication of fraud. Did you take that into consideration? I'm not sure who's the best person that might be able to speak to that.
Heat maps are a indication of what?
Fraud.
Of fraud.
Oh,
That's news to me. How should
that's
I
news
say
to me
this?
too, and I can't answer that. But I'd be interested to hear from that person on how they deem to be indicators. I'm
Right.
certainly interested in hearing
Wonderful.
more.
So that's
Well,
that sounds
what I can say is that from the use of our research, we basically the way we use it is to use heat map hand in hand
Yes.
with spatial coding, so that it helps us
mm,
understand when people display certain emotion, what are they looking at. So a lot of times you see you can associate certain emotion with a particular wording appeared on the screen, a particular frame, even audio cues you heard on the video. Um, that's the way we use Heatmap. And in the case of this particular study that I just shared, we used Heatmap to make sure that people were engaged during the during the study, during the test.
wonderful. Thanks for clarifying that. And John, if I could ask you, what if brands don't have sufficient funds to increase their SOV at this time? And this kind of nicely ties into another question that we've gotten, which is saying consumer behaviors have changed a lot during the pandemic. So has the news environment. Brands need to cultivate new ways to engage customers. Are there any new ways that we'll see how advertising will work now and in the future? So I guess the first part of it is, what if I don't have a huge amount of budget right now? And the second is, what are you kind of seeing from a commercial aspect?
Yeah, I think if brands don't have a lot of budget right now, and a lot of brands are certainly under pressure, that's understandable. But I think the message is to maintain your presence in the market, and sadly for publishers, at the moment, because there is a paucity of liquidity in the market, one could say there's actually some really good deals going around. So I think that for brands, even if your budget is small and you can't increase, you could probably look around and shop around for some great deals. And also the fact that, your competitors themselves may not be spending. So naturally your share of voice will increase. But I think that a lot of brands, I know that Unilever, Alan Jope, the CEO of Unilever, was saying that their marketing strategy with regards to advertising has changed dramatically in light of COVID. And they were certainly moving more money into digital and looking at ways to engage with audiences, maybe programmatically or via cheaper media. They wanted to stay in touch and they need to stay in touch, but they basically had to sort of cut their cloth to suit their suit, as it were. And what was the second question, Laura?
It was focused around, are there new ways that we will see how advertising is working given the changing consumer behavior and the consumer, I guess, news consumption right now?
Yeah. Listen, I don't have a crystal ball. I mean, obviously, you're right. Consumers, what we've obviously seen, and Sally can attest to this, is huge spike in consumption of news across the board on all platforms, driven by COVID, but not just about COVID. And what we've actually seen is, certainly at the BBC, is more and more consumers are actually consuming news or non-news content because we can't just be inundated continually with news about what's going on in COVID or bad news, or we are actually looking for non-news content. So we have seen on our verticals on like BBC Culture and BBC Travel, even on BBC Travel when people aren't traveling, heightened levels of traffic as people are seeking other ways to sort of remain positive and remain engaged and stay in touch with the world and also with what's going on outside. I think that there will definitely be we won't be. I think that we won't be going back to where we were before as a news provider. We as a news provider have had to certainly change our output to meet different consumption of this pandemic and the way that people want to basically hear and read about the news. And I suspect that will basically influence the way that we run our business, going forwards. But if I had a crystal ball and I knew exactly what it would be, I would be a richer man than I am now, or not.
Makes sense. John, Sally, I have to thank you both for sharing so much today. I'm sure there will be more questions. We've had a couple asking for more examples, etc. And so anyone who wants to get in touch afterwards, we will send them your direction. Thank you again for sharing. For those who are asking about the slides and to get more information, you will of course be getting a survey after this, which in which we'll ask for your feedback, and in return we will share with you the leave behind that the BBC team have left with us. For those of you, I did promise that I would be able to put the link for our sign up for newsletter. I managed to not be able to do that. I'm not quite sure why, but you'll get that in our survey feedback form as well, so you can sign up. Our next webinar will be next week, so please keep an eye out for the announcements around that. For now, thank you all very, very much. Thanks again to John and Sally, and we will see you very, very soon. Thank you.